Good evening, Bible fans everywhere. I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. We do this every Sunday night, whether you like it or not, from 8 until 10 p.m. Eastern. And we do it right here. Join us sometime in our chat room. We'd love to have you. We're looking at an extended sequence of articles relative to God and to evolutionary theory and some other things thrown in. In this segment, I want to talk to you a little bit about Darwinian's effect on the world. If Darwinian theory is right, then the species is very likely evolving upward towards something more complex and no doubt better. Of course, history teaches another reality. History teaches us that human beings used to live longer lives, at least prior to the flood. That human beings seem to be healthier, stronger, even taller before the flood. And then even after the flood, the record shows men and women living well into their second century of life. And their accomplishments are amazing. Egyptian pyramids and the statuary that goes with it. The Babylonian, Mesopotamian, Sumerian architecture, science, and art is astounding, as well as their religions. Things like astrology and the mythologies. Their accomplishments harken back over 4,000 years, the skill, the talent to construct a boat the size of Noah's Ark. Have you seen it? It's in Kentucky. They tell me it's huge. The skill and the talent to build the pyramids and the towers. Have you ever heard people describe the precision and the weight and the amount of time and the people and the mechanisms to get all this together? The skill to map the heavens and be able to navigate by stars. We have conquered technology, but they had the skill. The evolutionary model does not allow for any of this. Today, folks are mocking the Bible's story of a universal flood. Yet every major society on earth has a flood epic in their past. And the religions are similar in belief and in style. They have the same gods, the same goddesses. They got different names. And they represent the same sorts of things, and they're doing the same kinds of things. Egyptian, Roman, Greek, and there are a bunch of others. There seems to be a very strong connection with original parents and initial values. Evolutionary theory is essentially contrary to science. You see, we all know you can't get something from nothing. And that's essentially what evolutionary theory is suggesting. That something from we don't know what or where, made up of something we can't identify as to source, exploded. The explosion which created something useful. Try that in your backyard. More than that, something which had the capacity for life. An explosion of chemicals. Right here, any scientist worth his salt would have to stop. Because scientifically, none of that's possible. Not based on what we know. But we soldier on. Out of this explosion came chemicals and such, which eventually became complex materials that gave rise to life. Not human life, not yet, but the essence of life, which continued to evolve upward over millions, billions of years. What in nature evolves upward? What gets better, stronger? Nothing. What moves by its own power or innate ability upward into ever more complexity? Nothing. Well, things were different back then, and other things were mixed in, which made it better. You do know we're talking about an explosion like no human being has ever seen before, right? Well, this is how the conversation goes until the scientist steps in and tells us we just don't understand science. There were other forces at work, forces which are no longer at work today, forces we don't understand, forces that facilitated the growth, the life of inanimate chemicals and stuff. And given the immense amount of time in question, life eventually formed. I'm always fascinated when these big numbers come out for the amount of years it took to do these things. And then we see a Mount St. Helens that carved a mini Grand Canyon in a matter of months. And you just wonder. And then you have this whole idea that life evolves ever upward until it reached Homo sapien. And then it stopped. It got as far as it could go. Well, it may not have stopped. We don't know. And we won't know for another 10, 20, 100,000 years from now. But we're seeing signs that evolutionary progress is taking place. We see that in our transgender community. Have you ever stopped and asked yourself why otherwise intelligent human beings would think the transgender movement is good for anybody? You probably, if you think it is, we need to have that conversation. I've talked about it on the show before. I will again. It is an amazing issue. Well, in 1979, Dr. Stephen Stanley wrote a book on macroevolution. He found that, quote, the known fossil record fails to document one single example of phyletic evolution accomplishing a major morphological transition. That's fancy talk, isn't it? He said it can't happen. Dr. Derek Ager, in his book, The Nature of Stratigraphical Record, published in 1981, tells us that, quote, the history of any one part of the earth, like the life of a soldier, consists of long periods of boredom and short periods of terror. The changes don't come over time in any kind of, they come in rapid catastrophic events. They don't happen in gradual uniformitarianism. And so here we are. Everything we know about natural processes tells us that things tend to rot, they rust, they decay, they die. But the world exists based on a theory that is opposite all of that. Everything we know about natural processes tells us that species are dying off. Plant and animal species are going extinct every day. A 1989 study found 1,000 plant and animal species going extinct every year, minimum. Yet we're expected to believe it wasn't happening before. We know that everything in this world is getting old, weak, rusty, dying. But evolutionary theory is built on the idea that the system is getting stronger and more complex, better. And our children are fed this stuff in school. Our TV and our internet pushes this stuff at us every day. Even in our churches, liberal churches, teach this contrarian view. If you don't believe it, then you must either be stupid or you're seriously uneducated. Why? Well, because the only opposing view includes God. And God, if he exists, He's public enemy number one. Here in America, we are killing babies which indicate birth defects prior to birth. If we really believed in evolution of the species, would we do that? We don't know but what they aren't the next form of human life, and we're killing it off. It's stupid, scientifically. If evolutionary thinking believes humans are getting better, living longer, why are we legalizing, supporting, creating ways to kill off people sooner? With diet, drugs, sex, disease, alcohol, homosexual unions. I got news for you. They don't multiply. They have to go outside the system to get babies. The Bible tells us the story of creation, the effect of a power outside our system large enough to accomplish that task. Creating by divine fiat, speaking things into existence, starting with a solar system, focusing on this earth, starting with a planet covered in water, then dividing that water into two parts, one above, one below, the firmament in between. He called that firmament heaven. The waters under the heaven he gathered into one place, allowing dry land to appear, implying there were waters above the firmament, which one day would be released as a giant flood. God then gathered the waters under the firmament into one place so that dry land appeared. No indication of continents, simply a land mass. He decreed that the earth would bring forth vegetation and animal life. The vapor canopy of water providing a constant temperature, room temperature, shielding them from the harmful rays of the sun. Sin enters into the system and changes the living arrangement. Adam and Eve are thrust out of the garden, forced to make a living, farming, sheep herding, whatever. Sin would change the topography again in Noah's time, along with the climate. The climate would be harsh. You put that much water on the earth, it's got to lower the temperature. You have exhausted the water vapor that protected you from the sun's rays, and so now you have harshness on both ends. Scientists estimate a serious ice age would have resulted, followed by a serious warming period, followed by a little ice age, followed by another warming period. As the water subsided, much of it freezing. We call them north and south poles. This is the study of hydraulics. They understand this stuff. Did you know in the days of the Valley Forge, 1777, 1778, we were in a little ice age. It lasted roughly from 1700 to 1850. It would be followed by a warming spell, which some believe we are still in. In Noah's day, the water chained up below the earth's crust was released. The Bible says earth shot up into the atmosphere, releasing the water there. It also indicated a large amount of water was trapped below, which now shot up. And we can still see the scars. And this slosh in the ice age and the little ice age and the waning thing, all gives indication that there was a lot of water on this planet at some point. Water that's now trapped in ice. That there was water trapped below the mantle and that there was water trapped above. And all of this has now come together, and the climates and so forth all shout, yeah, that's possible. We see the Mid-Atlantic Trench. You can look at a Google map and you can see it right up the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Provides the longest mountain range on planet Earth. Where'd it come from? It's quite possible This dates all the way back to Noah's flood, when the Bible says the earth erupted, throwing tremendous amount of dirt and trash and junk and water up into the air. There it is. You go in the Pacific Ocean, you see the same sorts of things. You see a mantle of the earth's crust that now is broken up into pieces, and they're moving. Wasn't like that before. The earth changed drastically. The canopy of water over the earth was blocking a lot of the sun's harmful rays. Now those rays are not as seriously limited. Lifespans are seriously reduced. Noah was 600 years old when the flood came. Methuselah lived 900. His great-grandchildren didn't last much past 100. It's only in the recent years, with the aid of home insulation, central heating, air conditioning, better diets, less harsh working conditions, added to by better medical treatment, at least those of us in the West, we're living longer lives. Currently, we're expected to live into the 80s. In my youth, it was the low 60s. Did you know in 1930s that Social Security was initiated? It didn't kick in till you were 65. And the average age of the working man in those days was 60, 62, somewhere in that range. Our benevolent government, Democrats, never intended for the majority to ever have this benefit. So far, nothing in the Bible that the Bible declares has been outside the natural limits of known science, except for the existence of an all-powerful God. And the records continue this way, speaking casually about dinosaurs and about men together in the book of Job. Peter refers to a world that then was, talking about before the flood. The same is true about age markers. Pick a system or a species, and the estimated age in Earth years for them will be much lower than anything an evolutionist is required to suggest. The decay in the Earth's magnetic field is calculated at about 10,000 years. The influx of radiocarbon to the Earth system, about 10,000 years. The origin of human civilizations date back only 5,000 years. The development of total human population, about 4,000 years. The formation of river deltas, about 5,000 years. The list goes on, pointing to a relatively young Earth. What do these people achieve by undermining these facts? Well, they get to unseat the one true God of the universe. To what end? To establish a relative moral value system, one that does not judge them by any external standard. And beyond that, nothing. The whole thing is entirely self-satisfying. You gotta love them.